Dan, ready to go? All right, thank you for coming out tonight for these planning board interviews. So I'm going to call to order the Narragansett Town Council work session meeting, September 7th, 2021 at 6:05 p.m. We are conducting a work session to interview selected candidates to fill an expired term on the planning board. So what we're going to do tonight is conduct 3 interviews. We have a good amount of time, so no rush as we go through these. All council members, feel free to ask as many questions as you like. And if any of the applicants have questions for us as we go through this, as you're being interviewed, feel free to speak up as well. So what we're going to do is start with Mr. Mark Brady. If you're here, just please step up. Come ahead and step up to the podium, please. How's it going? Good. Dan, can we make sure the mic is on?
That one?
All right. First of all, thank you for applying and for volunteering your time to a town committee. We always appreciate that. So we're going to go through the council. Everyone's going to have a chance to ask questions, and we will start alphabetically as we always do. So, Councilor Cicilline Bonanno, if you want to get us started tonight.
No, so if you could just share a little about yourself and why you think you would be good for this position of the planning board.
Yeah, my education background, I have an undergraduate degree in economics. I also have a second degree in urban affairs policy formation. I have a master's in community planning and area development. I specialized in environmental and economic impact analysis.
Mark, can you just move the mic a little bit in the front? There you go.
Right there.
Thank you.
Is that better? I can put my teaching voice on if you want.
Maybe the fan, if we could shut that off, Dan, maybe. It's kind of hard up here to hear. I want to be able to hear Mark.
Sorry.
Added value to the town. I want to hear it.
So,
Thank you, Dan.
my wife is bragging that at 60 I got my PhD in economics, in engineering, which just goes to tell you I'm educated beyond my mental capacity. I dragged my wife around the country, so I've lived in a number of communities, and I've always been involved in any community I lived in. We were kind of instilled that by our parents. I lived in a planned community in Houston, Texas. I've lived in Massachusetts, New York. So I've been on planning boards, I've been on town councils, finance committees, different building committees, I've been strategic committees. So I've seen town government from different perspectives. So I think I bring that experience back home. My wife and I are back after a hiatus of raising our kids in Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Susan, do you have any specific questions for Mr. Brady?
I don't at this time, but as he answers further questions, I may.
All right, Councilor Jasinski.
Good evening, Mr. Brady.
Mark, please, my father.
Okay, Mark. So my question is, I did see the application. I saw you were interested in serving on several different committees. Is this, would you rank this as the top one, or are you open to serving on whatever would be available for you to serve on?
I think my best fit with my background would be planning or maybe zoning. But we've come back home. I want to get back involved in the community. And I put in my application that I'm kind of at the disposal where you think my skills best fit. And that's really the bottom line on that.
Thank you.
All right, and Councilor Kopech.
Good evening, Mark. Nice to meet you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I'd like to know, there's a phrase called property rights out there that talks about people who have a sense about how they should be able to manage their property, and I was wondering what your feeling is about that phrase.
Well, I think it comes down to the policy set by the town council, really, that dictates that. I think, planning board is not a policy board as far as, my experience has been. And I think, but it is an advisory board. And I think having lived in Massachusetts, where there's exclusivity, in New York, similar, You know, what do you want as a community? Do you want an inclusive or an exclusive community? And that's what you have to decide. I think a lot of the issues, and frankly, I've been following them passionately, because, you know, I ran around here as a kid. You know, we surfed everywhere. You know, we scuba dived wherever we could. We were fishing. I think a lot of it is expectations. And I'm not sure who, you know, in every case, there's different people painting those expectations. But, you know, people are coming in, they're coming from communities where they have one set of expectations, and they think that carries over to where they're living. And then, you know, it may be other parties that contribute to it. I think, you know, again, the planning board works for the council, and the council has to decide what direction and what picture do they want to paint of the community. And then it's up to the planning board to support that.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question.
I think so. I think I get the idea. Another question. We've had, you know, a year and a half where almost all of our meetings are on Zoom, and I was wondering if you ever, you know, Zooming attended any of the planning board meetings that we had.
I did a few here and there. I tell you the truth, I was drowning. I teach engineering and architecture at Brockton High School, and we Zoomed completely. And so I had to because I'm a project-based teacher, so everything is done on hands-on. So I had to take that classroom and move it to a virtual space. So I was literally pulling 16-hour days trying to get that. So I did peer in, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't a rabid attender, though.
Okay. And my last question is, you know, we have ordinances that define how things can be built in this town. We also have variances, and I was, you know, wondering what your feeling is in terms of a variance versus an ordinance.
I think a variance is careful. An ordinance is the rule. I'm here partly because 2.5 years ago, my wife and I sat before the planning board. And I will tell you, I have the most amazing respect for the planning board, specifically here, because I've seen other planning boards, and the ability to balance policy, legislation, and the needs of the individuals. So again, I think it's a case-by-case basis. I think you need to really look at, you know, when you look at individual projects, whether it be multifamily or just a single family, multi-homes, multi-construction, or just a single, those are individuals. But how do those come together to paint the long-term picture of where you want to be? You know, it might be something that you judge here and say, okay, for this person we'll do this, but that may have impacts down the road as to how things are going. You wanted the town to go in this way, now all of a sudden you're over here, and is that really where you wanted to be? So I think when it comes to variances, careful comes to mind in my mind.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for applying for this position, because I think it's really difficult and there's a lot to know.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting. It's fun. So,
Thank you.
thank you. Did I answer everybody's questions to the fullest? I thought it was being dismissed.
No, sorry. Great questions, Deb. Good questions. So a few questions for you.
Go ahead.
How familiar with the town's comprehensive plan are you?
I've been going over it the last few weeks. As with any comprehensive plan, and I've put comprehensive plans together, they're comprehensive. You know, and so there's a lot of meat there, and it's carving out that meat. So but I've gone through it. I think it was done very well. I think it was very thorough, and I think there's a very clear vision there, and I think that's key for any community, whether it's on, because that really guides whether on a legislative basis where you are, regulatory basis, whether it's the planning board, zoning board, or whatever direction, historic districts, and the like. So I think it was done very well, frankly.
Okay, great. So reading through that, and I know it's a pretty big document. I haven't read line for line. You know, I read it pretty well. But based on your time with it, what would you say thematically and conceptually what goals in that comprehensive plan are going to be the biggest challenges to achieve here in Narragansett? So what I mean is like, we have certain mandates and goals for affordable housing.
Right.
Demographic, stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to address. I think, one of the areas to look at for the town is where the town going demographically. I mean, the demographics are changing, and they're changing rapidly. That impacts not only affordable housing in general, but it also impacts the public buildings, their usage, their capacities. Do you plan for obsolescence? Do you plan for change of use? And if you do, what kind of complementary uses are there? So I think that is a key issue. I think you're having people like me who want to come back home. And, so we did. And we bought a Cape. We didn't go hoopy. We paid fair market value for it. But what you're and that's a similar home for a starter family. What you're seeing right now are people coming back with money, and they're overbidding on houses. And those are houses that, once it starts, and I hear a lot of people around town, young people who are looking to homes who are already discouraged to even start looking because they're like, well, I can't. I'm going to be outbid anyway, so why bother? And I think a healthy community is a mixed community of different experiences, different ages, different insights. And when you start to skew one way or another, you start to lose what your image is, and your image is now being shaped by the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult balance. I think one of the impacts to this community, because you see it started on the West Coast, it's now moving, are LLCs that are really disguised condo or co-ops. People use those as LLCs legitimately as part of financial planning. It's been done for a long, long time. But now that usage is being usurped. And I think that causes some severe problems for every community, but especially communities near attractive areas, whether it be the ocean or another attractive area. So I think there is a lot of pressure coming.
Right. Okay. Great. And then my last question for you is, for you personally, what's been the most interesting maybe application or ordinance that's kind of come through planning over the last year or two that you've been kind of paying attention to?
In this community?
Yeah, right, in Narragansett.
Well, I think the obvious ones that have come through are some of the limitations on housing for students. I think, I understand the motivation. I think it also has consequences to it from a planning perspective. You start to put pressure on homeowners, especially people who own multiple small homes in town, to now do construction and expand those homes. Is that really what you want? I don't know. I'm not really that familiar with the direction that the council wants to take, but I think, those are things that I think anybody on the council or anybody on the planning board needs to ask themselves, because I think it's something that needs to at least be studied. What are the impacts of that are not anticipated? I think one of the most wonderful things for me in having a master's in community planning is, I talked to friends of mine who were doing their MBAs, no hit on MBA people, but they were like, Brady, you can be out in a year and a half. What are you doing? You got at least 2 years, you got these license tests and all of this. But what we were taught was, okay, you solved this problem. Terrific. Now what other problems do you cause? And that's a perspective I've done through my entire life. And those are things that I look at when things are proposed or things are instituted. Okay, great, you solved that problem. And you can debate to a lesser or better degree. But what other problems has it caused? What is the ripple effect of that? So, and I don't have the answer for that for you. Wish I did.
Great, thank you. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for my questions. Do you have any questions for the council?
I think really more is for me to understand more intimately the direction of the council. What is your vision of the community 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Because I think that's essential to the direction of the planning board. And that really, I think, is the guiding light, in my opinion, in my experience. Planning boards don't lead. I think some people get into planning boards thinking that going to change the world. It's not the function of the planning board. I think planning boards are instrumental in educating council on specific topics that the council is investigating or things that are coming. But I think that's really the privilege of being on the town council. So, that would be, I think, a bigger conversation than here. But that would be one of the first things that I'd look to find out is what is the direction? What is driving it? Because it drives design. I mean, a lot of people in our neighborhood, when my wife and I bought the house, were very terrified that we were going to knock it down and create a McMansion. We bought it because it was an adorable little cottage, and we kept it a little cottage. That was my design, and my wife and I walked through it. So we kept it a cottage because that's the design. That is what the neighborhood is. We live up in Metatux. It's not a McMansion neighborhood. It's cottages. It's single family, split levels, capes, and the like. So I think design really on the surface is key, and consistency in design is key, but also consistency in the message and the direction. So I think that would be, for me, the biggest question, because that would be the guiding hand.
All right, great. Well, thank you again for coming out. We appreciate it.
Is there anything I didn't answer for you?
No. Thank you, Mark.
All right, is there anything that I said that concerns you? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Actually, before we move on, I just want to make a quick statement for anyone kind of watching this, just to kind of keep everyone in the loop, including the public. The current member of the planning board, Don Layton, the reason we're not interviewing him tonight is because he's not pursuing the seat for another term because he's going to be living part-time elsewhere. So we would have given him the courtesy of an interview, of course, but that was not something that he wanted, so that's why he's not here tonight. So I just want to be clear on that.
And I just want to make a comment before you call up the next applicant. In all the years I've served on the council, we've never had open interviews like this in the public, and I actually think it's amazing. So thank you for leading that, Jesse.
No problem. I think the whole council, I think, was interested in doing that.
Yes,
so.
I understand that.
Okay, and thank you, Don, for your time serving as well, if you're watching. Next, we have Roberta Brady. Hi, Roberta.
Hi. I'm not related to Mark. I've never met him before.
Oh, okay. I figured. Although it would have been a good strategy to get someone on the family on.
Yeah, well, no.
We do have another
Me
Metatuxet.
No, I have a large family, but he is not part of it.
You guys are in the same neighborhood, though.
We do live in the same neighborhood, but I don't know what street he lives on. I don't believe. Oh, Fernleaf. Okay, I know exactly where Fernleaf is, and I live on Inkberry, down the hill. So, okay.
Small town.
Yes, it is, and that's the beauty of it.
Well, Ms. Brady, thank you for applying and for being here tonight. We appreciate you coming out. So before we go on individually, I think the way that we approached the last applicant was good. So if you want to kind of give us an introduction of your background, that'd be perfect.
Sure. I am originally from East Providence, on the other side of the bay. Grew up there, lived there for 40 years, and then moved down here. I've been a homeowner here since 1991. Just moved here permanently when I retired in 2017. I am by profession also a teacher, only I am not at the, excuse me, at the high school level. I was a K-1-2 teacher, and I taught in East Providence in the neighborhood that I lived in. I see great value in being part of a neighborhood. When I retired, I wasn't sure what I was going to do here in East Providence. I was very involved. I was involved as a teacher, as a community member. I served on many different communities within the city. Very concerned about my neighborhood and my friends and my family, which I considered my children in school and the people in my city. I have a child who just graduated from Narragansett High School, and was impressed that just about everybody knew everybody forever, and the new people that, including my child, was welcomed and felt like they belonged here. I too live in, well, as we've said, in Medituxet, and we do have many homes where there are college students. I make it my business to go and introduce myself and tell them where I live and chat with them. I've never had any difficulties. I have opinions on 3 and 4, but I won't go into that right now. I don't know what else you'd like to say. I live with my husband, my 2 kids, my dog. My sister-in-law lives across the street. We have family members in the town.
Great, yeah, perfect introduction. Susan, you want to start?
Thank you, Roberta, and for your contribution to education. Thank you.
I enjoyed
As an
it.
educator, so thanks. So I just was curious, interesting that your introduction, 3 to 4. I'm just interested in knowing what your vision is for the planning board if you were to get that position. Like, can you just give us a little bit of your interest, because it is a little bit different than education, so what would be
In
your
terms
vision?
of what my
What you hope
opinion
for the
is
town,
on-
yeah.
Well, to be honest, I am I was a sociology major with a concentration in education, and there's a big difference between 3 people together and 4 people. 4 people generally get along better. There's always one on the outs when there are 3 people, the old dyads and triads in sociology. Having said that, it's important to be sure that that's how many people are in the house. I have a problem with the big homes that people added onto, and just, if there was a bedroom, they put a kid in there. I mean, that's just totally wrong. And that, I don't think, is the vision for this town. 4 people, once again, I make it my job to go and talk to the people that own the home, because they're there inevitably at one point or another, and I give them my opinion, and they tell me what the kids are majoring in that are living in the house. And generally, they've been great. I would prefer myself to have a discussion about 3 and 4, but my preference is 4. Because 4 is what I've seen, and 4 is what seems to be working, at least in my part of the neighborhood.
So, okay, thank you. I was just wondering if that was your motivation or your interest, or...
Oh, gosh, no.
Just generally, as an educator, you applied to the planning board, what skill set or interest or what vision you had for the town of Narragansett outside of the 3 and 4, just generally speaking,
Generally
density,
speaking,
design.
I like the small town atmosphere. I do know that we are kind of forced with people like Procachanti, whatever the heck his name is. I'm sorry to be fresh, but sometimes it's the ch and sometimes it's the k. Procachanti. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm concerned about that kind of big development. I think we could make, certainly with approval, development of different kinds, but that big kind of development, I don't think fits with the Narragansett town that I know. I know that there is certainly room for development. I know that there are parcels of land around town that are for sale, but I don't see big industry, big motels around. I mean, part of the charm of this town is the small motel, the small hotel, and there are many of them around as well.
Okay, thank you. That was a little more specific for me, thanks.
Councilor Drzezinski?
Yeah, good evening. So I also see that you were interested in several different committees. What skill sets do you think you could bring to the planning board?
As I said, I have worked on many different committees, worked well with many different kinds of people. I'm open-minded, and I have the time to sit and read the comprehensive plan, as well as the many other books that there are to read. I understand there are many different things that are necessary. I am retired, so I do have the time, and I do take rides every day through our town and look and see what's happening and what is the town. So I think that is a specific skill set in itself, in that I do take the time to look and investigate and ask questions.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Kopek?
I have the worst microphone. Excuse me, I know, no, I'll do it, it's fine. I'm kind of going back to the same questions that I asked before. Have you sat in on any planning board meetings?
I haven't. I've seen a couple of them on Zoom.
Okay. Oh, you have seen a couple of them? on Zoom?
Yes.
That counts.
I have read many of the agendas, however, from the past several years.
Okay. And what is your position on, do you understand, oh, not, I shouldn't ask you that question, but what is your position on property rights?
Well, I'm a strong believer in property rights. However, if it's infringing on the public's ability to get to a certain place, then you have to use good sense and not allow that to happen. I know if you're speaking about the beach and the high water line and people cordoning off beach that really is public property, once you hit the high tide line, then they're allowed to do that. I mean, I myself walk the beach, and I've never had anyone tell me to get off their property, but walking right along the shore, I've never had a problem. But people do have property rights when they own it.
That's true. Also, as I said before, we have a vast number of ordinances that define how planning and zoning works.
Yes.
But then we also have variances. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, I do know that an ordinance is written almost as a law. A variance is coming before, well, if I wanted variance, and I have asked for a variance before, coming before a council and saying, I want to increase my porch this much, this many feet. And depending on the neighbors, depending on the neighborhood, it's either approved or not. And very often, I found compromise is something that is very often done, and that I appreciate, unless, of course, you're going to be infringing on your neighbor's property. Maybe that variance shouldn't be given.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for applying for the position.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. All right, so just a couple questions from me.
Sure.
So I like your background. I know it's not specifically related to town planning or community planning, but I don't necessarily think that is essential for this sort of role. I think it's good to have different perspectives on the planning board, and kind of the eagerness to be involved and the eagerness to learn and consider different perspectives is more important to me than that background, years of experience. So I'm going to ask pretty much the same questions that I asked Mr. Brady, and that is, are you familiar with the comprehensive plan, the town's comprehensive plan?
I have not read the whole thing. I am familiar vaguely. How's that?
Yep.
As I said, I have plenty of time to sit and read it, and I understand that if I were a member, then I would be expected to read it and understand it completely.
Okay, got it. So then my next question is going to be just a little bit different. So not specifically in the comprehensive plan, but generally as a resident and someone who kind of pays attention to the town issues, what do you think are kind of the big issues when it comes to general town planning right now in Narragansett?
It's how do we view ourselves in the next few years? Are we going to have 5-story hotels? I know I've read about the Scarborough Hotel, and they want to raise it 5 stories. Oh my God! And then 50 other of the smaller ones would be able to do the same thing. It would just, I mean, we're not some big time ocean community. We are a tight-knit place where people do want to raise their children, and I'm very upset about the rising prices, and I'm hoping that maybe young people will want to buy a piece of land and wait and build, because I think this is the kind of community that children, that families really appreciate. And I think that's the kind of place that I want to live, that I would hope everybody does. It's not meant to be a big city. It's not meant to have crazy traffic. I mean, even now, to get out onto 1A, you have to plan when it's summertime. And I say, great, come visit us, spend your money, and go home. But please be sure to pick up after yourself and be considerate. You know, I plan my time to leave my home, and Bonnet Liquors is always crowded in the summertime, so, you know, maybe I don't drink as many bottles of beer then, you know? But you understand what I'm saying?
Right, yep. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so any last remarks before we move on?
No. Well, I guess yes. I just would like to say that this is fun. I haven't been on an interview in years. I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't have said it was fun, but it is.
You did a fine job.
Well, thank you. I should have experience enough with it. But I really am interested in serving on some capacity, and I think the planning board is a great place to do it. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Have a good night. Appreciate it. Okay, so our third applicant is Thomas Callahan. Mr. Callahan, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
So why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself to the council?
My name is Tom Callahan. I live over on Baltimore Avenue, off of Scarborough Beach. I bought a house there in 2011 with my wife. We moved down here permanently in 2017. Professionally, I graduated from the University of Rhode Island, grew up in Providence and Warwick. Got a master's degree in administration of justice from American University. Never did anything with it. Followed my heart in politics and spent 3 years on Capitol Hill as a junior staff aide to Mike Mansfield in the final years of his Senate Majority Leadership. Went out to St. Louis, participated in a community development, leadership development program. Turned around a few years later and ran that program for 6 years. I'm sorry, Jesse. Can you hear me fine? Okay, I'm sorry. Excuse, I didn't know if you were signaling you couldn't hear me well. Excuse me. Left St. Louis to come back to New England to be close to family. We moved to northeastern Connecticut because I had a job at Aetna. Our families lived in Warwick and Narragansett, respectively. Worked at Aetna Life and Casualty for almost 10 years, did community development, community outreach, worked for the Aetna Foundation there. Saw a chance to move over to the University of Connecticut in 1995. They just had finished a strategic plan. The state had just passed a major initiative to invest a ton of money in the university over 10 years. And I said that looked like an interesting place to be. Went out there over the course of a 22-year career, held a variety of assignments that range from chief of staff to the president of the university, chief of staff to the head of the health center, to vice president for an initiative that was called Bioscience Connecticut. Retired in 2016, was recruited to come over to Rhode Island as Deputy Secretary of Commerce. Did that for 6 months, did not work out as well as I'd hoped it would. The administration asked me to stay and work with them with a team that was trying to rescue the UHIP Public Benefits Project. So I did that for 6 months and then re-retired and have been here ever since. Yep.
All right, Susan, you want to go ahead?
I can hear you.
It doesn't sound like it's on. In your application, you talk about your expertise, and you clearly talk about economic development, how you could bring that to the board. Can you be a little more specific about what you can bring in that expertise around economic development to the planning board?
Well, there's two specific things I can think of that may be useful. The first is that I know something about Class 1 research universities, how they operate, what motivates them, and what drives them. The university plays a significant role in Narragansett, both with the Marine campus up on the north side, as well as the number of students who live here in town, obviously. And I'm sure there's a bunch of faculty and staff who live here as well. So understanding how to harness where there are nodes of opportunity within the university to connect to, and how to harness that is something I think I have a fair amount of experience with. The second thing is, to the extent that folks are serious about doing something in Galilee. We had a very dilapidated town center in Stores, and I don't know if anyone's been out to the University of Connecticut in the last 5 or 10 years, but it's fundamentally changed the downtown. So the town and the university formed a public-private partnership. We hired a developer. We went through an extensive planning process that went for 6 years and permitting process. We raised about $25 million in state and local funds. That was other people's money that had to be applied to the project as a public subsidy. We ended up building a $225 million mixed-use retail, commercial, housing, 600 units of housing right on the university's front doorstep. Fundamentally transformed that area, made it really a beautiful place for it to come. So the last thing I'll say is, to the extent that the town of Narragansett, and I've seen the discussion of late, is focused on its utility infrastructure, specifically water and sewer. While at the university for 3 years, I led the group that was responsible for maintaining the university's facilities at UConn on the Stores campus. So I had responsibility for overseeing water, sewer, electricity, the whole 9 yards. During that time, a couple of things had to happen, and they did happen. One is we had a severe water issue. We drew our water from 2 river aquifers that in the summertime during low flow, we had the possibility of draining the river. And we did that once, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. So we went very strong in terms of a strong conservation program within all the dorms, all the buildings, and everything else in terms of really ratcheting down and making more efficient our use. We then built a reused water utility that took about 500,000 gallons of water a day to feed our cogeneration plant that fed electricity and steam to the university. And then once those 2 things were done, we were in a position to go to the state and secure a permit for an additional water supply going forward. So to the extent that those issues are resonant in Narragansett, and I think they are, I've had something to do with those issues at the university.
Thank you. I do have one other question.
Sure.
Your application says 35 years of senior administrative experience, and I was just wondering, joining the planning board, what would be the skill set, as an administrator, what could you bring to the group of people that you'd be working, because you'd be in a different capacity, just working within that group?
Gotta
I mean,
listen.
not always going to agree, there's going to be difference of opinions, and just curious to see, as from that level, what your skill set in working together with that board.
You work at a school, I worked at a university, and as the saying used to go, it was like trying to herd cats or butterflies. So there's no there's no central command within the university. It really is an organization that relies pretty heavily on building consensus. So you have to listen. You have to try to persuade people on the basis of not only what you think is right, but what you think their interests are. You have to be able to build bridges. And I think that goes for whether it's the planning board, whether it's the work that you do here, or any other board or commission in town.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Councilor Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan.
Sure.
I think you've answered most of my questions that I had. Susan asked several of them that I was going to ask you, but I do want to say I've seen you here at the council meetings in the past, and I appreciate your engagement in the community, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Kopek.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you.
Good.
It's nothing like being a little civil, right? So, same basic questions. First thing is about property rights, your position
They're
on that?
important. They need to be properly protected, and they need to be properly balanced with community interests as well. And that's the role of the planning board.
Okay. And I have seen you here on Zoom, but I don't know if you've attended any planning board meetings. Can you talk about that?
I have. Let's be very candid, over the course of the last 4 years, I followed a specific application pretty closely. That's brought me into the Planning and Zoning Board fairly frequently. Having said that, I've been engaged in other board meetings as well. I have spent a lot of time with the comprehensive plan.
Okay. And the other question was about, ordinances and variances. How do you feel about, the intersection of those two things?
Generally, when plans are put together, like the comp plan, they're working off of pretty high-level GIS information. And it's pretty accurate. It's getting more accurate all the time. But the ability to kind of get it down to how does it work in this particular location at that point in time. There are times when variances are relatively routine and perfunctory, and those ought to be granted. There are times when they are not. And I've had experience with both since I've been here. Particularly when it comes to wetland overlay districts. I think you got to pay very careful attention to what's going on in a situation like that. And I think one of the things the board has to be, the board meaning the planning board, has to be conscious of is the community, while they may not have a sense that it's going on, the community watches their work pretty carefully. And if they see variances being granted in a way that they believe is not being done fairly or is not being done uniformly, it undermines their credibility. And so I think you have to pay pretty close attention to precedent as you go along as well.
Thank you, and thank you for applying for this position.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks, Ms. Kopek. Mr. Callahan, so I'm going to ask this question. I think I know the answer, but you are familiar with the comprehensive plan?
I am.
And how much have you read through that?
I've read through it several times. There are parts and chapters that I've read more carefully than others.
Okay.
But yes.
Gotcha. So another question that's been the same for everyone. So you're very familiar with it. Would you say that there are a good amount of challenges for the town in order to meet some of the goals and the vision of that plan?
Yeah, the town, I was going to, it's cute to say the town's at a pivot point, but the fact of the matter is the town's always at a pivot point, right? There's always will be an issue that pops up. So now I think I have, having worked in Mansfield and having been the person at the University of Connecticut responsible for managing town-gown relationships for 13 of the 17 of the 22 years that I was out there, I have a pretty good sense of the dynamics of the student, permanent resident conflict and lifestyle, and how that works, and how insidious it can be, and how it can undermine and destabilize neighborhoods as you go forward. You need to be careful. You need to pay attention to it, and you need to focus on it. That said, I think students often get branded with unfairly, with overgeneralized in terms of being disrespectful. You have to pay pretty close attention to the landlords. And by that, there are great landlords, and there are landlords that are not so great. And people need to be able to pay attention to their property and manage their tenants, and it's a fair expectation for the town for that to happen. Like I said, you have development opportunities down in Galilee. You have, in terms of a potential development opportunity, I really don't know enough about how serious the flood-related issues are down there. I can tell you, building down is a problem. You're going to have to be able to build up, and that's going to be not inexpensive going forward. We've talked about water and sewer. That's important going forward. On the issue of affordable housing, I think, in an earlier stage in my life, and when I was out in St. Louis in the mid-'80s, I led a neighborhood association that was that represented 12,000 residents in 60 square blocks. We had a small housing development corporation, and we worked pretty closely with the city to get the services that we needed to kind of stabilize the neighborhood going forward. Affordable housing in Narragansett is a challenging issue in terms of the cost of land, the cost of building, the whole 9 yards right now. And I think I do not have a great answer for you in terms of how to think outside of the box. But we need to think outside of the box on this one.
Thank you. My last question is about the Clark Road application.
Yes.
It's all public, so, I think it's fine to discuss this.
Yep.
So that's obviously a applicant or an application that you're passionate about, and you've
Yep.
kind of been involved in, at least speaking publicly on it. In our role, when we're doing these interviews, to me, it doesn't really matter what personal opinion any of the applicants have on, any of the people interviewing have on these certain issues. It's more about how you're going to apply the ordinances that are already in place and the rules that are already in place. For that project, if you were to be appointed to the planning board, would you recuse from any, if that came back to planning and has to go through, would you recuse from any decisions on that?
I think I'd have to, yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure legally if you would.
I think I'm happy to seek counsel, but my hunch is what counsel will tell me is, yeah, I think I have to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, great. Any other remarks for the council?
Anything else did I miss anything? No? Okay.
I have
Thank
a
you.
question.
Oh, I didn't even notice you there.
Thomas, you lived and worked in a college town. How do you feel about the 3-student compared to the 4-student? We're more of a tourist college, waterfront community than what's going on over there at the University of Connecticut. So what's your feelings compared to the 3 and the 4?
You probably don't remember it because you get a gazillion emails every day, but you and I traded a few emails on the impact of seasonality, both on stores and here in Narragansett. And while the rhythms are different and some of the drivers are different, there are some distinct parallels along the way. If you look at stores, which is a village within Mansfield, you hear me talk about stores and Mansfield I use interchangeably. Mansfield they have both 3 and 4 on the books. 3 was, and they're 3 unrelated and 4 unrelated because they went with 4 starting in 2010 and then amended it to go to 3, grandfathered in those people that were in before 2010. My direct answer, Patrick, is I really don't know which is better, to be honest with you. That said, I know the following. You're probably not going to know the answer for at least 2 years. And I say that because you enact the ordinance tonight. There are folks that are getting leases signed for the next 2 years, right? So if you have a lease signed before you act tonight, assuming the council ends up where it started 2 weeks ago, then those folks who have signed leases for this academic year and the following academic year, and there are people who are recruiting for the 22-23 year right now. So one of the things that you're going to have to manage, or we're all going to have to manage, is the expectations associated with, we passed 3, why don't we see anything different right now, right? I guess my view, now having laid that I think I would have, if I were in your shoes, I probably would have voted for 3. I probably would have. And I say that because I think there is a level of frustration in the community right now in a lot of neighborhoods, and there's a lot of concern and worry about how this thing can spread. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is it for interviews for tonight. Anything left? Anything else that anyone on the council wants to speak on? Okay, great. So just for the public to be aware, we are not going to be doing any appointments this evening for this seat. That'll be at a future meeting. But again, thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate your time. All right. I think we just need to, do we need to even adjourn? Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll just adjourn.